Hey everyone, welcome back. Before I get started on these stories, I need to talk about something real quick. I've been getting a few comments where people are just angry that I'm doing sexual assault stories. And trust me, I do understand it. I will always put out warnings in case people have past trauma where they just don't want to listen to stories like that. And I completely understand if that's the case. But aside from putting out warnings, there's really nothing else I can do. Either choose to listen or don't, and I respect it either way. So yeah, I just wanted to say that before we get into the stories. Which, by the way, the last two stories mention pedophilia. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. For some context, I'm currently a 16-year-old girl in my junior year of high school, and the story happened when I was 14 and a freshman in high school. In the first semester of freshman year, there was this boy that I would talk to every now and then about schoolwork. We'll call him D. I didn't really care about D too much as we hardly even talked. Now, when the second semester of freshman year started, that's when he became creepy. I first noticed it when we got paired into a group project together. I noticed him staring at me from across the table, and once I followed his gaze, I realized he was staring right at my breasts. I became rather uncomfortable as any girl would be, and I tried to cover myself up. Now, I know some of you would think, well, what were you wearing? And although that shouldn't matter, I was wearing a long sleeve shirt that didn't expose my chest at all. Him staring at my chest also had me confused. I was insecure, and I didn't really have the biggest breasts, so I was really confused onto why he was staring so hard. I didn't think too much of his uncomfortable stare, as some other male classmates have done it to me before then as well, although this was just the start. After that day, he began to stare at me any chance he got, whether it be in class or in the halls. It wouldn't be at my chest anymore, but he would be staring right at my face. I would always see him from the corner of my eye, and I would try to ignore it as best as I could, although it made me extremely uncomfortable. Sometimes I would even make eye contact with him on accident, and I would think he would stop, but he didn't. He would just stare harder into my eyes and not even blink. The way he looked at me was so creepy. It was like he had dead cold eyes every time he stared at me. All this staring really got to me, and sometimes I would cry whenever I got home as I didn't know what the hell he would be thinking each time he stared at me. I started to become so afraid of him. This one day, however, really made me so uncomfortable to the point where I actually cried in school. On this day, I was supposed to present a project in class in a group with my other classmates. We weren't prepared though, and we had to stay after school and tutoring to present it. I didn't mind though, as now it meant that I could present it to less of an audience. In tutoring, there were hardly any people there, and I knew they weren't paying attention as they were doing their own work, so this made me feel a little better. As my classmates were saying their parts of the presentation first, I was calmly and patiently waiting for my part. As it was getting closer to say my part, I then see D and one of his other friends suddenly walk in the door. It felt like my heart dropped to my stomach as I then became anxious. I then see him walk up to one of the tables behind the teacher in the class, and I tried reassuring myself that he's just here to do his work and that he won't pay any attention to me. I was so wrong. As it was now my turn to speak in the presentation, my eyes wandered from the teacher over to D. I then see D humping the table and looking right at me with a big nasty grin on his face. All I could think was, what the actual fuck? This caused me to sort of mess up my presentation, and I felt really bad as I know it would mess up my whole group's grade as well. Once we finished our presentation and the teacher was giving us feedback, I then saw D finally leave the classroom. I had started to calm down a bit knowing he was gone now. Once the feedback from my teacher was now over, my classmates started to walk out of the class. I was really hesitant to leave the class as I knew the school was now pretty empty and I don't know if D is anywhere near me. At this point, he had really gotten to me, and I was scared he'd hurt me in some kind of way if he catches me alone. Thankfully, my mom was already parked outside the school waiting for me. So as I was walking to the exit of the school, I just sort of cried from all the anxiety I felt. Thankfully, I didn't see him as I was leaving, and I was fine once I got to my mom. After this, I really started to look more into evil eye jewelry. For those who don't know, the evil eye in general is a supernatural belief used to ward off variations of evil intentions, and it's said to send it back to whomever sent them. The evil eye is typically worn on jewelry, and in general is said to protect whoever is wearing it. It also said that once the evil eye has served its purpose, it'll break or get lost, as it has now gathered so many evil intentions and has reached its limit. I started to collect many evil eye bracelets, and I would wear one of them every day. And this may seem weird, but I think they worked. One day when he was staring at me yet again with those scary eyes, I had one of the bracelets on. And minutes later, I then saw him coughing, and he left to the nurse as he then randomly got sick. Now, I don't know if it was pure coincidence or not, but I like to believe it was my evil eye bracelet. Well, after that, he eventually slowly stopped staring at me towards the end of the second semester. Although I regret never telling a counselor or the principal, I'm just glad he stopped. I still see him every now and then, and whenever I do, I still slightly get scared. Even to this day, I'm still scared he'll do something to me. I can't wait to graduate high school and hopefully never see him again. And for those that experience something similar, I strongly advise you to please tell a trusted adult to get the situation resolved. It's not a good feeling keeping it to yourself. Trust me. Back when I was a naive child in elementary school, I had many teachers and many classes. I'll call the school Red Crest Elementary for it to stay private. I spent my preschool years up to 5th grade at that school, and many memories were made there. Some bad, some good. I still can't believe that this happened so long ago, and it's been almost a decade since I was learning there. I was mostly a straight A student, but that was a given because I was sort of a quick learner unless it was mathematics. But I made many childhood friends at Red Crest. 2 of the friends I met were twins. Their appearances differentiated slightly, but they had rhyming names. They were sisters. It's been so long since I've seen them, but they had this one teacher who was a male. I'll name the teacher Mr. Woods. I can't remember if he taught them or not. I remember either in 4th or 5th grade, there were apparent rumors flying around between the teachers and parents and the kids as well. Only a few of the kids though. There were cops outside the school one day, and we thought it was just another career day where the cops came in and show us how cool they are. But no. That night we were all given flyers about the incident. It turns out Mr. Wood likes children. A lot. He liked children so much in fact that he had lewd photos and videos of young children on almost all of his devices. He would take his phone out and he would make these poor kids dance inappropriately for him and give him favors, all being recorded. When the parents found out, they were shocked and outraged. There were cop cars that were present outside that day, and the cops had seen Mr. Woods outside and pursued him. He was caught and he was taken in immediately. I don't know where Mr. Woods is now, but I hope that he's been deemed a sex offender for the rest of his life. I would like to say that I'm sorry to any of the victims of Mr. Woods, and I really hope they got the help they deserved after the trauma they experienced with such a creep. So when I was 15, I developed a crush on an 18-year-old guy. I know people will debate that age gap, but all I can say is when I finally turned 18, I looked at 15-year-olds and wondered what the hell this guy saw in me. because I would never want to be with a 15-year-old myself at that age. Regardless, we'll call this guy Sean. He went to my high school, and due to when his birthday landed, I guess because he chose to be there, he had a few months before he would be gone and into adult life. In my country, we have a 10-minute period before classes begin. We all have a designated room and teachers take the register. The age groups are mixed, and he was in this registration class with me. He would smile at me across the room and gave me butterflies. I thought he was gorgeous, and it made me blush anytime he looked at me. I couldn't help but glance at him in the mornings. I can't remember how much time passed with him smiling at me. He sat with his friends at the back, and I was closer to the middle. The tables were round, and I always positioned myself to look at him. One day when the bell rang, my friend had a class in the other direction. I was walking down the corridor when I was aware of someone walking next to me. I turned and I had to look up because it was Sean. He was so much taller than me. He was like 5'10" and I was only 5'2". He simply said hey and then smiled down at me. It was that smile where your lips kinda disappear, and his hands were in his blazer pockets. I was so nervous but also squealing on the inside. I said hi back, and I felt so shy and awkward. He then fell out of step with me, walking in one of the classrooms as suddenly as he'd fell into my step. I turned to look at him and he had waved at me, and I was now swooning. I didn't tell anyone right away because I wanted to keep the interaction just for me. I lasted until after school. Then I cracked and I told my best friend about it. We thought it was so cool. The next day in our registration, he had smiled at me. And I noticed when the bell rang to signal that we had to go to our first class, he had hung back. I hung back too, and sure enough, he ended up walking behind me in the hallway. He had said hey again suddenly on my side, and I said hey in return, this time more confident. The next day he didn't do it, nor did he the day after that. I wanted to know why, and I started to feel stupid for being so giddy over it all. I really despised just how dumb I must sound. The next week at school, he had started walking near me again. This kept on for a week, and I felt excited again. One day I felt him tug at my bag strap, and I turned to face him. The hall was full, and I could feel my cheeks reddening. He had then asked if I ever smoked during lunch, and I said no. He must have known that looking back. He asked if I wanted to meet him where everyone smoked, and I found myself agreeing to this. He also told me to come alone, so I did. I had told my best friend the truth, and my other friends were told that I was ill, so we wouldn't be joining them at lunch. I then went to meet Sean at the back of this corner store where a bunch of the people smoked. He was with his older friends, and when Sean saw me approaching, he had told them something and they had kinda walked off and just formed their own separate group. Sean waved me over and then walked down these steps behind the shop. I followed him. It was just us, but we weren't really alone. There were people not too far above us. He had offered me a cigarette, and I coughed up my guts trying to smoke it. He then laughed at me, and he told me to copy him. He asked if I was definitely in the year group that I was in, which I said yes. He started asking me a bunch of seemingly random questions. If I lived nearby, about my family life, did I have any other brothers, a job, etc. Talking to him felt good, and he told me to add him on Facebook. I did so later that night, and we began to chat. We ended up exchanging phone numbers too. We chatted every night, and after a few months, Sean was no longer a high school student at my school. I felt that when he graduated, a part of me had worried that he would forget about me. But he didn't. The week of his graduation, he asked if he could call me for the first time. I was so excited, and I said yes. On Friday nights, we would stay up late chatting. Sometimes he told me to fall asleep on the call with him. He told me one night that I was the only one who understood him, and that he was falling for me. I confessed that I'd liked him from the very start, and then he told me that I was too cute. I didn't feel like it was patronizing at the time, but perhaps it was. He advised me not to tell anyone about us, as it might sound inappropriate, as he was no longer a student. He eventually got a job in a restaurant because of a family member, and I promised not to tell anyone. He asked if he could take me out one night, and I said yes. One day after school, I had told my parents I would be going to the library, then to a friend's house. In reality, I just got changed out of my school uniform in the girls' bathroom, and then Sean picked me up in his dad's car. I met him at a street away from the school, and when I got in the car, he whistled at me. I felt so cool, and he drove me in the next town like 30 minutes away, and we went to a cafe. Sean had bought me everything, and he kept complimenting me, telling me that I was stunning and that I had the most beautiful eyes in the world. After our coffees, he had drove me to an old pier in our town, and that's when we had our first kiss. It felt like a dream come true, and he told me I was his girlfriend now. I didn't even think about how he never asked me, he just told me. I was so giddy with excitement that nothing even mattered. He drove me home, then dropping me off away from my house. We had started spending time together in secret. Most times he'd just park his dad's car somewhere and make out with me. One time in his car, he got excited. He asked if I had ever seen male equipment before, and I said no. He asked if I wanted to see it, and I said that I wasn't ready to do anything. He said that he wasn't asking me to, just wanted to see if I wanted to see his junk. I said okay, but I felt really fucking awkward. I didn't know what to say, but I complimented him. He seemed satisfied with this. Then he told me that he wanted to clap me. I didn't know what that meant, but he ended up driving me home and I didn't want to look stupid asking. Later that night, he told me that he was touching himself and that he really wished I was with him. I felt uneasy, but I told myself I shouldn't. I mean, this was my boyfriend and this was normal, right? But I felt like he was escalating and I just wasn't ready yet. I ended up asking him the next day if he had slept with girls before, and he said yeah. I told him that I'd never done anything, and he said that he knew that, but that my first time would be with him and that was apparently lucky for me. Cringy, I know. He had started asking me when I wanted to sleep together, and I just kept saying that I didn't know. He kept saying that it would be fine and that he just wanted to make me feel nice. I felt pressured, but I ultimately decided to give in a little. I asked if we could just fool around and he said yeah, and then promised that he wouldn't go too far. I ended up going to his house when he was home alone, and when I got there, he had offered me whiskey. I had a sip, but I felt too nervous to really drink it. He didn't drink any himself, but he just kept encouraging me to drink it, but not forcing me. He just said it would take the edge off, but I couldn't do it. We were in his room, and I then decided that I was comfortable with him touching me. I told him to please be gentle and to go slow, and he thankfully did. When it ended, he had pulled me on top of him, and he told me to pull his pants off. I did what he asked, and he then started begging me to sit on his little man. I said no, but he just kept begging, and he said it hurt him because he wanted me. I said no, and I felt really stressed because he promised that it wouldn't go too far. He got annoyed, and he told me he didn't understand what the big deal was. If I can let him touch me, I can let him smash. I really hated how vulgar he spoke to me, and I just wanted to go home. He refused to drive me home, and he lived like 25 minutes away on foot. We then had an argument because I told him that I didn't want my first time to be on top because I knew it would hurt. He said that it wouldn't, and that all his past hookups loved it. I was getting really angry, and I ended up just walking home. It was light outside, so I was fine. He had showed up to my house the next day with flowers. My parents were out, and I forgave him. I told myself that he must love me to risk encountering my parents. He said that he was sorry and that he didn't want to pressure me. Part of me was screaming to kick him to the curb, but I was dumb and weak. Honestly, I'd experienced abuse in my younger years, and I think that's why I couldn't see how fucked up certain things were. Sean then said we'd take it slow, and I was really glad to hear that. Time passed and I went back to his place. He again offered me alcohol, but I said no, and this time he left it completely. The same thing happened as last time, only this time he kept kissing me. He then asked if I wanted to touch him, and I agreed. He then told me to lie on my back, which confused me, but I did it. He then stripped and got on top of me again. He told me that he wanted me to fillet him whilst lying on my back. I told him that I thought he'd want to lie down for that instead of me, and he got so mad at me. He said that I was so shit in bed and to just let him fuck me. He tried to shove himself into my mouth, and I screamed no and started shoving him away. I got up and ran into the hall, and I could hear him call me a bitch from his room. I was about to go downstairs when he had threw some of my clothes at me, then told me to fuck off. When I then got home, I was so upset and I felt so guilty. I had tried messaging him, explaining that I just felt like the position was way too much for a first time, but he never responded. I felt really stupid, and I had spoke to my best friend about it all. She told me that Sean was a douchebag and a perv for attempting to pressure me. Then she said that I shouldn't do anything that I don't 1000% want, and I knew that she was right. But I really wondered if I really was a shit girlfriend. I didn't want to be selfish, and I was really scared I was being that way. It was summer, and Sean didn't talk to me for a few days. When he did, I felt sick, as he had then sent me a video on Facebook Messenger. I don't know if it was him in the video or if he took it from an adult website, but it was a zoomed-in sex video, and he then told me, "This is what you're missing out on." I asked him why he would send me that, and he wrote me a long message about how he was glad that he didn't fuck me and that I was just a slut anyway. He said that I moaned way too loud and it was really annoying to listen to me and that I sounded like a prostitute. He also claimed that my thighs were blobby and I was fat. I was really devastated to be told these awful things, and I believed him for a long time. Truth is, he was only saying it to hurt me. He was only mad he didn't get what he wanted. I told him he was vile and that I was sick of him making me feel bad. He then proceeded to block me. I never saw him again after that, although I did see one of his friends in the street a few times. Every time though, they looked away uncomfortably. I wonder what they knew. I look back at this time in my life and I really hate how weak and stupid I was. But you live and learn. I hope young girls know they should never stick with anyone who pressures them into awful things. You aren't selfish for wanting simple acts and for not wanting crazy positions for your first experiences. Never do anything you don't truly want to do, and always listen to your gut instincts. If a guy starts calling you names because you won't do what he wants, he's only trying to manipulate you and cause you emotional pain. He's lashing out because he's mad that you aren't doing what he wants. Don't listen to people like that. Hey everyone, that's about it for today's stories. If you have your own story that you would like to send, you can send it in at southerncannibal.com, or you can email it at southerncannibalstories@gmail.com. I look forward to telling your story. Have a good night or good day everyone, and remember to always